We have boys and girls. They grow up to become men and women. It's not the product of our choice. It's not what we want. It's what happens organically because it is nature. Putting low IQ ideologues like Sammy Cortez in charge of the power grid really does, in the end, mean the end of civilization. It's not hard to have a decent country. It's not complicated. You just need leaders who want one. Freedom of speech is under attack. Your loyalty to your family, to your faith, just because they require you to violate all of that doesn't mean you have to.
We have smoke machines just like that at my house. I pad into the kitchen this morning in my boxers and they go off. Seems appropriate. Thank you for having me. So funny. Thank you. I honestly, I say this every year. I come to this every year and I always open by saying, I never go anywhere. It's just literally true. So this is like my one venture out of my house of the year, and I just love it. I run into, no, really, I live far and away in isolation with my wife and 4 dogs, and I love my life. But I come to a place like this, and I run into every person I've ever known and liked throughout my entire, I ran into Harmeet Dillon backstage, who I absolutely love, who is one of the very few lawyers in the country who still believes in the Bill of Rights and is trying to go to Washington and make it better, a person of integrity, and about 20 other people I know. So it is a huge blessing for me to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I've spent the last 3 hours backstage chatting like a 7th grade girl, just like a magpie, and another thing. So I hope I'm not all talked out. Well, you're nice. Thank you. But I was thinking the last month, as I was flying out here this morning, I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? And it's not usually a problem for me since I can't stop talking. I can't decelerate. But the last month really has been one of the most interesting, I don't know if we have enough critical distance to call it transformative, but it's really changed the way I think about a lot of things, which when you're 53 is a rare occurrence. As you get older, your beliefs tend to ossify, and you're like, I first thought of that in 1985, and it's still true. So it's kind of nice to have something pierce those assumptions and learn something new. And the midterm elections taught me a number of new things. And I should preface my story of what I've learned by telling you that you never learn anything except through pain and humiliation. I wish that weren't true. Unfortunately, no one has put me in charge of the rules of nature, so that is the law, and it's unchanging. But you never learn anything from succeeding. I have never learned anything from succeeding, from getting what I want. I've only learned from failure, and particularly from humiliation. That is, I'm sorry, I wish that weren't true. Yeah, well, exactly. And I thought of that on the plane today. I'm like, I'm literally flying to Maricopa County, Arizona. Unbelievable. It couldn't be more perfect. Thing that I think all adults should do when confronted with their own failure, I went pheasant hunting for 3 days. No, I did. I literally did. I went to South Dakota and stood in the cold, walked through cornfields. I did. And there was a ton going on, and I did it anyway. And I never take time off because I like my job, but I did. And I did it because I needed some silence in which to marinate in my shame. Because I knew out of that would come enlightenment, or at least the beginning of it. And here's what I concluded. A couple of things. This was a fantastic reminder that we can't really predict events very well as people. Actually, there is a limit to our insight about the future, to our predictive powers. That's not a limitation of talk show hosts or of people who come to Turning Point. That is a human limitation that every person is bound by because, repeat after me, we are not God. So we actually don't know what the future holds, actually. And not to be morbid, but we could all get hit by a bus on the way out of this building. And pray God we won't be, but we could be. And that's a truth that we live with every day, and if we're wise, we never forget it. We don't know what's coming. We control the moment we're living in now, and that's it, and barely even that. We have less power than we think. We can't even cure male pattern baldness, okay? No, it's true. It's true. Or add a single hair to the top of our heads, in other words. So to tell ourselves, like, we've got it all figured out and we know what's going to happen, we are lying to ourselves, and when we say it out loud, we're lying to others and misleading them. So we should start with the knowledge of our own limitations. We are limited, and that is the beginning of wisdom, right there. That's the beginning of wisdom. And the opposite of that, by the way, is the beginning of hubris, which is the cause of virtually all the suffering now currently on display. People who don't understand their own limitations, who don't understand how unwise they are, who have no sense of their own ridiculousness, who really believe they've got it all figured out, and only if we can get a bigger supercomputer and more AI, we'll have the future mapped. People who make that claim, and worse, who believe it, have made the fatal error in life, which is mistaking themselves for God. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the division in life. There's clearly, and you can smell it, and I should say at the outset that I was raised an Episcopalian, so my spiritual discernment is blunted at best. So don't take any theological lecture from me, please. I stayed with that church till 2 years ago. That's how out of it I am. And it's like fully a pagan enterprise now. Like, literally, I think they're burning calves they've slaughtered or something at the altar. But I can feel that a lot of people just in my orbit, and I see it in conversation. I'm not sure there's like some great revival going on, but there is a growing sense that we can't see everything that's happening. There are other forces at work here. That's not a sectarian point. I'm not making a case for Christianity, though I could and would be happy to, but I probably don't need to here. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm not making a point about a specific religion. I'm making a point about the existence of something more powerful than us. And that shouldn't be a point that anyone would have to make because it's just so obvious. You're born knowing that. Every person has, inborn, literally at birth, a sense of justice, of right and wrong, a sense of betraying other people, lying to them, stealing from them, hurting them is wrong. The fine points we are taught, but the basic facts we know, they arrive, like a dog's ability to swim. Like we're born with it. Now, why are we born with that? And it's always the same. You can read Hammurabi's Code, you know, one of the first documents we have in all of history, and you would recognize the moral code right away. You might not agree with all of it. You know, the beheadings seem a little much. But the crimes are still crimes. Because it never changes, because we didn't write the rules. Duh. So what does that tell you? It tells you there's something bigger than us. And that's never something that most people at most periods in history, in fact, at any period in history, have ever needed to learn. Because they knew it. It was assumed. There's never been, in other words, just to put a fine point on it, there has never been a society at scale in all history that we know of until now that was secular. Where it wasn't just an obvious observation that there was a God or that there was some force larger than us, that we weren't the last word. We've had plenty of kings and emperors, but all of them ruled. Every single one of them ruled. From the Roman Empire to that fake duchess from Santa Monica who's married to the airhead kid who's going to be king. From then until now, every monarch has ruled on the basis of the claim that he was chosen by a power bigger than himself. I'm ordained by God. So, like, God is central to our understanding of justice and to our understanding of government, and has been since people emerged from the caves and probably before. So my only point is we live in a society, the only society ever, and by we I mean the West, where that's not taken for granted. Why is that significant? Well, here's why. Because in place of that has been the option, which is leaders who believe they are God. And the problem with believing you're God is you're not. You're not. And you can't be. That's just not true. So it's not just an offense against theology, it's an offense against reality. Like, that's not true. You can't extend your own life, much less walk on water, much less fix a complicated diplomatic situation. Like, you have no power. And the minute you pretend otherwise, you lead us into disaster. And that is true at the national level. Having people who don't believe in God, in other words, who don't acknowledge an authority above themselves, isn't just like bad, it's a recipe for total destruction. Period. And just to be clear, I'm not making that point as a Christian, which I am, so I'm not saying you need, I'm making a much broader, more ecumenical, more human point. Leaders who don't believe in God think they are God. Repeat after me. Leaders who don't believe in God think they are God. And the last person you ever want in charge is someone who is demonstrably insane. And anyone who thinks he's God is, by definition, insane. And so they are. And that fact, I would say, explains the majority of what we're seeing now, the things that confuse me as a middle-aged man who's looking out on a country I don't recognize, and more specifically a politics I don't understand. So why would you be encouraging children to mutilate their bodies? No, I mean, yeah, it's offensive. I mean, obviously as a parent, I'm a room full of parents and young people, like, it's very offensive on that level. But think about it philosophically. Like, why would that be so important to you? Why? Why would that be so important? Why would advocating for abortion, not tolerating abortion, I am pro-life and I mean it, actually, but it's just true. But I also, since I grew up in a tolerant country that acknowledged that decent people disagreed, I'll just say out loud, I know people who consider themselves pro-choice who are thoroughly decent people. I think they're completely wrong, but I don't think they're evil. And that's kind of where we lived until 2 years ago, when all of a sudden you started seeing people advocating for abortion. Like, no, it's a good thing. What? That's not the conversation I grew up with. The conversation I grew up with was, there are situations where people are forced to do this bad thing. It's only been in the last couple of years you've had people stand up and say, no, it's the key to salvation, abortion. Why would you say something like that? What does that mean? It's at that point that you realize we're not really having a political conversation. This is not a conversation about our rights, our bodily autonomy. And by the way, I'm sorry, the bodily autonomy argument, the my body, my choice, you kind of blew that with the vax mandates, son. So back off a little bit. Obviously. By the way, as one of the only people in my business who actually thought it was my body and my choice and was screamed at for it, buzz off. But anyway, sorry, leaving that aside, leaving my eccentric medical choices out of it, I would just say it's not really about that. And those of us who were dumb enough to think it was, those of us who were still referring to slogans written 50 years ago to explain what was happening today, missed the whole story. No, it's not about that at all. Anyone who's advocating for abortion as a positive good is doing something very different. It's not advocating for women or choice or freedom. This person's advocating for killing other people. Like, what is that? What is that? Not tolerating killing of other people. Not like, wars are bad, but sometimes you have to in self-defense. I get it. I may disagree with you. On abortion, I may disagree with you, but this is a different thing. No, you should do this. Our Treasury Secretary said, literally, Janet Yellen said. Janet Yellen, who, I can't get over this. Since I'm aging, I get stuck on certain things and keep repeating them. Janet Yellen ran the Fed. So, why is the U.S. dollar worth so much less than it was 15 years ago? Janet Yellen? Anyone? Janet Yellen, anyone? It's like you did that, and then you became Treasury Secretary? I mean, at that point, it's like, meet your new Treasury Secretary, Sam Bankman-Fried. I mean, as long as we're rewarding fraud with high government positions. Anyway. But she comes out on television. I don't know how she was Treasury Secretary in charge of wrecking the economy, and all of a sudden she's on TV saying, yeah, well, some people are feeling this inflation thing, which we don't acknowledge is real, but for those of you who claim it is, get an abortion. What? What is that? It's demonic. That's exactly what it is. It is. That's next level. That is purely an effort to hurt people, not help them. If you cared, and I do care. I mean, my dad was adopted, and his mom was like 15. And I get it, a pregnant girl. I mean, as the father of daughters, you feel for that person who feels trapped, no choice, no future. It's a disaster. And I don't think it justifies abortion, but I certainly understand why people feel like they have no choice. I get it. But if you really cared about the woman, you would say, what can we do to help you? How can we help you? Obviously. If that happened to someone you love, I don't care if you're pro-choice or pro-life. It doesn't matter. If you really love that person, you say, how can I help you? I love you. I want to help you. You wouldn't say, just go get an abortion. Stop whining. So what does that tell you? Well, they don't love you. They're trying to hurt you. That's real. So why are they trying to hurt you? There's no rational explanation for it. How do you know if something is good or bad in a world where the rules have been suspended, which they effectively have been? If you can't say that's bad, then we can't really say anything's bad. And what's bad is just what the people currently in charge tell us is bad, but that doesn't mean anything. I like chocolate, you like vanilla. I mean, that's not a moral code. That's a fad. But as people who want to sort of try occasionally, at least on Sundays, to be decent, we should have a way of knowing whether something is good or bad. Now, traditionally, I think for most Christians, it's like, well, just ask your pastor. But then, at least as someone who grew up in a church that became pagan, I can tell you that doesn't always work. So, yeah, I think that's a totally fair answer. But for people who aren't going to dive into the Bible, I think there's a beginning, a simpler way to get a sense, and you can put a finer point on it later. But here's how I assess whether an idea is good or bad. By its fruits. And what are those? Well, first of all, any idea that causes a lot of people to suffer for no reason is demonstrably bad. That's obvious. But I will also say that bad ideas produce chaos. They produce disorder. They produce noise. They produce ugliness, physical ugliness, aesthetic ugliness. Bad ideas produce ugly things. That's why our great basilicas are beautiful, right? That's why the dollar store is ugly. Because one grew out of the idea that we need to help the average person transcend his life and think about the next life, about the eternal, about God, and the other grew out of the idea, let's sell more cheap plastic crap from China to poor people, okay? So one grew out of, I think, the most noble idea, and the other a less noble idea, and the results are obvious in the way they look. Don't ignore the obvious. If something is beautiful, what does that mean? By the way, beauty transcends culture. You go to a place you've never been where you don't speak that, go to Kyoto, Japan next week. Probably don't speak Japanese, probably don't know a lot about the Shinto religion, go to a Shinto temple. The first thing you'll notice, it's beautiful. Now, how did people 500 years ago in Japan come up with the building that you, as a modern American who doesn't speak Japanese or practice the Shinto religion, think is beautiful? Because all beauty is the same. And what is beauty? Beauty is truth. That's the first thing. True things are beautiful, and beautiful things are true. It's true. It's not a pose. It's real. It's real. And the most beautiful things are real. Your children, your dogs, nature, those are real things. They're beautiful. And the second thing you'll notice about it is that it's calming. Beautiful things are calming. They don't incite you. They calm you. They make you feel peaceful inside. And how do they do that? Through symmetry. Through symmetry, physical symmetry. This side is equal to this side. Just like in nature. Virtually everything in nature is symmetrical. Have you ever noticed that? In case you're wondering if there was a grand design here, I know this all evolved randomly. But somehow it evolved randomly in a beautiful way, in a recognizably beautiful way, in a symmetrical way. Now, why is symmetry important? Because it's a product of order. Order. Bring order out of chaos. That's how this all began, we learn in chapter 1, and that is still to this day, our duty. Bring order out of the chaos in your home, in the buildings that you build, in the politics that you participate in. Order, not chaos. Chaos is a sign of evil, period. And you don't know how hard it is for me to use the word evil as someone who never grew up using the word evil, but I don't have another word for it. That's exactly what it is. So you will know that an idea is a good idea when the people who follow that idea have lives that are calmer, more orderly, more purposeful, cleaner. By the way, filth, remember the phrase, cleanliness is next to godliness? You'd be like, oh, that's a Victorian phrase. They were so stupid. They had cities without, people smoking meth outside the Civic Center. Idiots. Cleanliness is next to godliness, actually. Yes, you're a mother, I can tell, right? All the moms are like, that's exactly right. It's true, though. It's true. It is totally true. So anybody who is pushing a program that creates confusion, chaos, disorder, anyone who is pushing cultural products, which is art, film, literature, quotation marks around all of them because none of them currently are art. But anyone who is pushing art on you that is disordered, chaotic, asymmetrical, architecture, Frank Gehry, anyone? What is that? It's disgusting, is what it is. It's oppressive to the human spirit. It doesn't elevate us, it crushes us. That's what it does. It's exactly what it does. So that's how I judge it. And if you see enough of it, you know there's no rational explanation for this. Something else is going on. So why am I still in a good mood? And I'll stop with this and take your hostile questions for a minute after. I'm still in a good mood for two reasons. One, I think it's my moral duty. I think we have an obligation to be cheerful. I don't think it's a small thing. Yeah, I mean that. I do. I think it's an obligation. I don't think it's something we feel when we have the second cup of coffee, though I always have the second cup of coffee and then the third and the fourth. Yeah, I'm pro-coffee. Yeah, I'll say it. I'm pro-coffee. There's nothing wrong with that. No prohibitions against that. But I think it's your obligation. Like, you're not here that long. And moping and feeling, sometimes terrible things happen. A loved one dies, you get fired, in my case, several times. And you have an absolute right to wallow in it for a bit. But just for a bit. It is immoral to lie in your own emotional filth and roll around. It is immoral. You have no right to do that. That's an offense against the creation, in my opinion. Get up and be cheerful. And as one of my children once said to me, what if I don't feel cheerful? And I said, well, pretend. Duh. Well, that's fake. Yeah, good. And the longer you fake it, the more it becomes real. Put on the mask and your face will conform to it. Pretend to be something and you will become it. Pretend to be cheerful. How are you this morning? I'm great. How are you? Great. We both just got a bad diagnosis. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to impose that on you. I'm great. But the second... I'm getting crazier as I'm getting older. I think it happens to everybody. Anyway, sorry, excuse me. But the second reason... Okay. So the second reason... which is a little bit, actually, I'm not joking at all about the cheerfulness thing at all. In fact, I said to one of my children, when picking a spouse, put cheerfulness above almost all else. I'm actually married a cheerful person, and it's been an enduring blessing. I mean it. Because, life throws you stuff, and, it's just I've had a really blessed life, but no one's life is perfect, and things happen you don't expect. You run out of money, or someone you love dies, or your neighbors hate you. And, as you go through those things, which will happen to every young person in this room, being married to someone who is legit cheerful, says a cheerful spirit, there are probably things that are more important, but that's right at the top of the list. It really, amen. If anyone who's married to a cheerful woman knows what I'm talking about. What a blessing. And I should also note, just to be honest, that the opposite is hell. Anyway, But here's the, not that I've experienced it, but I've seen it. But here's the point. Here's the deeper reason that I actually feel really hopeful. And I have no empirical evidence for this at all. But I told you I went pheasant shooting in South Dakota for 3 days, and I was feeling a little bit down and just like, I can't believe I did that. I'm 53 and I'm still making obvious mistakes, like telling people that things that are probably not going to come true will come true, and I should not ever be doing that. So, but then I had this surge of hope and of optimism. And it stemmed from this knowledge that has been earned over time, I would say, which is it is 100% true that your lowest points in retrospect were the best moments in your life. That is true. And no one ever wants to believe it. And I think that is both a spiritual principle. I mean, I believe there's an entire book about it. You know, that everything is actually the opposite of what you think it is. That the last really will be first. That's not just a rhetorical device. That some guy sitting by the side of a lake in first century Israel said. Like, that is like a reality. Always and everywhere. If you look back and you're honest on your life and the really sad things that happened, and they are real for everybody, if you're honest, you will see that it's only out of those that happiness grew, that was the foundation for something better, that all wisdom is accrued during those moments. All wisdom. That is definitely true. All wisdom. When you're at your lowest. And that's not like some fake motivational speaker like, no, actually, it's always darkest before the dawn. But it is. That's the thing. It is. And the opposite is also true. The opposite is also true. Your victories are so often your losses. I had the great blessing in my life is being able to talk to people. And I did an interview with a guy I didn't know, a wonderful man, a really wonderful man called Jimmy John Leotoad, who started Jimmy John's Sandwich Shop. And last spring, and I interviewed him, and I didn't know that much about the sandwich shop, and I live very far from sandwich shops, and it's just not my region, and I didn't know that much about him. And we're talking just about politics or whatever, and he started this business in college. I don't actually think he went to college, but as a young man, he started this sandwich shop out of a garage. He never took any money, no venture money at all. He took like 20 grand from his dad, repaid it, and he works on this thing like with maximum full-bore intensity for 30 years. And then he sells it, and he sells it for like 1.8 billion. And his total investment payout was zero because he was the only investor. So he wakes up after 30 years of making sandwiches, and he gets over $1 billion. Well, that's like, you don't hear that story every day. And I said, what was that like? He goes, it was awful. Really? He goes, yeah, it was awful. You know, that's when I reached my goal that I had devoted my entire life to reaching, and things started to crumble inside me. I had no objective. I had no mission. I wasn't fighting against anything to get where I wanted to go. I was already there. And when I got there, it was just me. And it really set off a crisis inside me. And by the way, I should say, for the record, I think that crisis made him into a much deeper and happier man. But he had to go through the crisis. And he went through the crisis at exactly the moment of his victory. And he's not the only person who's told me something like that. And I myself have felt that way. You know, you really want something. It's the kind of the weird ennui you feel at the age of 8 when every last present has been opened under the tree and you're like, it's over. And like you're kind of psyched to go play with your new Spider-Man stuff, but then you're like, Christmas is done, you know? That's the moment of victory. When you're 8, victory is Christmas. Like that's all that matters. Like that is, like you've won. But in your victory, you lose a little bit. And that's always true. But thankfully, the flip side is true. So I have no idea how this is going to play out. I'm completely over my brief flirtation with pretending to predict the future. I've thrown my crystal ball away. I'm not going to read your palms. I have no idea what's coming. But I am totally certain in my heart, and I mean it, that we will look back in this moment, and if you're not even conservative, if you just think what's going on now is really wrong and really destructive to the country that you love, and imperiling, dangerous to your children and grandchildren, future generations, if you feel that way, and I think most people do, you will look back on this moment of despair and confusion. What the hell just happened? No one really knows. It's bad, we know that. We don't really know how or why. You will look back on this as the beginning of clarity. You will. Beginning of clarity. This is when I really began to understand what was happening and what I personally could do about it. I changed for the better. Suffering causes growth. That is always true, and it's true now. Thank you, and I will take your questions.